for joining us again on our podcast. Today we are welcoming Eoghan Kenny as our guest. Eoghan, introduce yourself and we'll kick it off.
Thanks, Kira. By way of introduction, my name's Eoghan Kenny. I started off in a very traditional legal career path, did 2 law degrees, and then trained and qualified as a lawyer, which was actually where I met Kira.
Yes, we did work together for years, some fun years. But let's rewind and go back to your youth and whether you decided, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer.
I don't think I had an aha moment, but it was always one of those careers that I was considering. And I was probably one of the few that was always on that list. The others changed a lot. I think my mother would, if you were asked my mother the question, she would tell you that she always knew I was going to be a lawyer. But that was just because I never really accepted her answer and always wanted to debate it and argue it. And I felt like sometimes I could win. And I never really understood that it didn't matter if my logical arguments were better. I was never going to win because she was my mother and she decided something and that was that. So I think what always appealed to me about the law was the kind of the logic and the critical thinking aspect of it. I would have done a good bit of debating in school and I always enjoyed that. I enjoyed advocacy and I enjoyed the kind of like the competitive nature of advocacy, which was part of the reason I think I ultimately ended up in litigation in particular, because that aspect of the law was where I would have seen myself. There are other parts of law, and I think it's one of the things that maybe is not taught as well to prospective law students or even law students, is how broad law is. There's parts of law I would hate to do, like whole practice areas, and I have friends in those areas and they love them. So I even think sometimes we do a disservice to junior lawyers, even teaching them how broad the practice of law can be, because it's not just like one homogenous block of this is what being a lawyer is. Like what a funds lawyer does and what a litigator does are very different. And there's some commonalities, but there's probably more different than there is the same between them.
I couldn't agree more. I changed from M&A to litigation. And yes, absolutely very different depending on the department.
I always think one of the things I think is a big misconception about law, and it's largely just because there's so many legal programs on TV and or legal movies, is just like what the day-to-day of a lawyer looks like. And it's not like Suits or like Law and Order. It's not all dramatics and days in court. You do get a few of them from time to time, but most of it is paperwork, emails, meetings, phone calls. Like it's much more administrative, I think, than people do. And I think one of the things a lot of lawyers, and I say this as one, I think one thing a lot of lawyers don't even realize is how much of their job isn't law. A lot of our jobs aren't, not every lawyer spends all day, every day advising. You do an awful lot of administrative tasks, from billing to note taking to just project planning to client development, all this sort of stuff that takes up a lot of time, but it's nothing got to do with law. It's just got to do with the business of law. And sometimes I think you can get drawn into how like attractive certain aspects of it are on television. And then in reality, like the television never shows the other side of it. Now, some people love the other side of it, which is like some people love the deep, the academic side where you're doing detailed research and writing detailed memos, but you never see anyone writing a memo on Law and Order. Whereas that's what, like, particularly as a junior lawyer, you might spend a lot of your time doing that sort of research. The other misconception I always think is when you watch something on TV or a movie, it's go to court on a Monday, lose on a Tuesday, appeal on a Wednesday, get a decision from the Supreme Court on a Friday, and everyone goes for cocktails. Like in real life, that takes 5 years. And like, I always think the speed at which law operates is not as quick as a lot of people think it is. And sometimes clients can come in with that misconception and they can be quite frustrated about how slow things move because they, like everyone else, may have thought that, sure, on TV it happens really quickly. Why isn't it happening really quickly in real life?
So law is a bit slow and it's not as fancy as in Suits. Maybe you can tell us a few words about it and what makes you excited in the day-to-day.
Yeah, like I think what always attracted me is I like solving problems. Like I like that critical thinking aspect of the role. There's an element where you have to put your best case forward, and sometimes that can be a little bit like an intellectual puzzle. So it's about finding the pieces that you have and putting them together in the best way possible in order to further your client's case. Sometimes you will have cases that are really straightforward and your client is 100% going to win on all issues. Other times it's much more for the courts to decide that there are strengths and weaknesses. And I really enjoy the kind of intellectual exercise of trying to make your strengths as strong as possible and to find a way to make your weaknesses as strong as possible as well, so that they're like that sort of challenge, that problem that you present, and the problem remains the same, to do the best you can for your clients, but the like case to case, the facts will change dramatically. So oftentimes there's different ways you might approach that, and there's a lot of strategy involved in that. And I like that part of I've always enjoyed that part of practicing law, the kind of strategic thinking part, the critical thinking part, the trying to anticipate the other side's move and how you might counter it. It sometimes can be almost like a game of chess where you're trying to think 2-3 moves ahead, and then maybe they make a move that you didn't think they would, and you might have to rethink your strategy. And I like that kind of dynamic aspect of it, where it's not just straightforward moving from A to B to C. Sometimes you might go from A to D, and you've got to think and approach things slightly differently because there was an acceleration in the case strategy or something.
So we often get also an image of practicing law as a very solitary activity. Is it like that? Also, chess is very solitary.
Yeah, I think for some lawyers, it certainly is. For me, it's not at all. I've always worked on big teams. From my perspective, that's something that is a non-negotiable for me, because I've always enjoyed the cut and thrust of working in a team. And for me, I wouldn't be interested in working for myself, by myself, in a room, doing law on my own. Now, there's lots of legal colleagues who do that and love it. And I think that's more of a personality thing as much as anything else. I think sometimes if somebody is naturally introverted, they may enjoy that because they find dealing with people drains them of energy. I'm the exact opposite. I'm an extrovert I gain energy from human interaction. Like I found during COVID, when we were all working remotely, I found that much more challenging than when we all started coming back into the office, because I realized about myself that like I need that human interaction to keep me like recharged and moving forward. So I think there are, like, you can practice law by yourself on your own. That's not the law I practice, and I personally have no real desire to do that, because I know myself well enough to know I wouldn't be any good at it.
That's interesting. And now I'm intrigued to hear what a typical day look like now.
Yeah, so they're very different to typical days. Like as a litigator, your week always started on a Monday, which was a court list day. So invariably you were in court. You would probably head down in court, dealing with a couple of issues, couple of case directions, depending on which way a judge might go on an issue. It might accelerate, delay, or mitigate some deadline that was coming up. So you might have to jump into action quicker than you were previously, or you might have actually more time than you thought you were going to have. And then the rest of your week generally consisted of moving your caseload along a reasonably predefined path, because the day-to-day of a case and the steps in a case are defined by the rules of the court. So you go from pleadings to discovery to pre-trial to trial, and you'd be meeting your client and advising them and updating them along that step.
You're managing a lot of also human emotions, and I think that's one part that perhaps people that are not in the profession don't fully understand, the human factor. And that's one thing that for sure, or probably AI won't cover, but that's also a word that we hear very much in our everyday life, how AI is going to change this profession, or actually professions across the board. I was wondering, what do you think about it? Is this a buzzword? Is it a buzz concept? Or how do you see it affecting the job of the lawyer?
I would be very much in the AI evangelist lawyer category rather than the AI skeptic. And I suppose in my role, so like if you take a typical discovery, and just for the benefit of any listener who doesn't know what a discovery is, anytime a client or an organization has to produce a large volume of evidence, documents, or other forms of electronic evidence, that process is generally referred to as discovery. So think about the dawn raid, where a regulator comes in and seizes a load of data, and then our clients asks us to advise on what they seized. That involves going through sometimes hundreds of thousands, millions of documents to identify what's in there that might potentially create or not create a legal issue. So that's a process in the Irish system that involves in investigations, but also in litigation. And like in e-discovery, we've been using AI for many years, and we've been using different kinds of it, predominantly a thing called continuous active learning, or its predecessor, technology assisted review. The acronyms would be CAL and TAR. But those two types of AI are what you would call predictive AI. So they're really good at predicting outcomes. So what we use them for is we use humans to train an algorithm to predict whether or not evidence is relevant or not to the case. And like we've been using that for the last sort of 5-6 years on pretty much every case that we do, that certainly whenever it's appropriate, we have 4 of them ongoing at the moment. And the reasons that we do this is like it's already proven in peer-reviewed scientific journals that this is as good, if not better, than humans doing this task. And because we use AI as a human amplifier, as a human cost multiplier, we can also do it faster, more efficiently, cheaper, and better than if it was just humans. The reason that I like, so with the predict and outcome tasks, I think AI is already like pretty embedded in a lot of the practice of law. But the reason I would be much more in the like AI evangelist category is the reality, I think, of what most lawyers do day to day. If you were to break down their average day and ask how much as a percentage do they spend predicting, the answer is not that much. Like it's probably a single digit percentage of their day that they might spend being predicting the outcome of something or predicting the likelihood of something. Whereas generative AI, which is obviously the sort of next evolution of it, where you can generate content based on prompts, is, to my mind, an iPhone moment within law. Because if a lawyer spends 5 or 10% of their day predicting the likelihood of something or predicting the outcome of something, they probably spend the other 90% generating content, whether it's emails, advices, sort of administrative documents around billing or internal management. There's a huge amount of generating of documentation involved in the practice of law. And so the application of generative AI is to a much larger percentage of a lawyer's desk, in my opinion, than predictive AI, because we just generate a lot more content than we predict, if you follow my train of thought.
I do, and this is coming from someone who did the painstaking manual review of thousands of documents in Discovery as a trainee. So I definitely agree. I'd be on your side of the camp in terms of the power of generative AI. If there was, what technological innovation, anything in the world, you can be extremely creative here, would make your life easier now?
That's an interesting one. I always think with technological innovation, and this is something that I have learned the hard way through introducing technology within law firms, is when someone asks you to solve a problem, oftentimes that's not what they're actually asking you. So sometimes we might have an internal stakeholder comes to us and says, look, I really want a solution to this problem. And you will provide them with a solution through either technology or a mixture of technology, people, and process. And what they actually want is this problem to go away and for them not to have to change how they do things. Because the solution we might present to them requires them to alter their workflow or them to change the order in which they do something, or like a small, modest inconvenience to them. And oftentimes that's too big an inconvenience for them to see the value in the change. Not always. And like, I always think of it in terms of like, there is probably 2 sort of competing lines on a graph where one runs on the X and one runs on the Y. And anything that's north of the cross of them is where technology can really help. Because if one is the level of inconvenience and one is the net benefit, the challenge for a lot of the things people say they want is they're below that line. It's like, you know, personally, I would love if AI just made that I didn't have to record time and it just recorded all of my time, because I think that task is inconvenient and it's not, in my view, like the most satisfying or useful use of my time. The flip side of that is if we don't do it efficiently, we can't charge and get paid. So as a business, it's literally one of the most important things that we do. But I don't enjoy doing it. So I would like someone else to do it for me. Whereas some people are much more happy doing that, and they get a satisfaction of logging all of their time every day and just being like, look, this is what I have achieved today. And they can see it and it's tangible and it's real. And they can say, I'm on track for my budget for the week, the month, the year. To me, that's just, I would much rather someone else did that for me. When you look at like where the technology innovations have come within law, in my view, certainly the products and technologies that have penetrated the deepest into the legal market generally solve problems people didn't like doing. So if you take e-discovery is a good example, or due diligence is a good example, these were very repetitive processes that a lot of junior lawyers generally got tasked with. And for the most part, some enjoyed it, but for the most part, others would have said it's fine in small doses, but I don't want to spend a lot of time doing it. Whereas if you look at some of maybe some of the technologies that are less used, like there are some really good document automation technologies out there, but they're not widely used as much as maybe they should be. But that's because lawyers like drafting. A lot of lawyers would have been very good in languages in school. They would have spent a lot of time, if they were English speaking lawyers, they would have spent a lot of time. They're probably very good English students. They enjoy writing. And when you say you don't have to draft this document anymore, you can just fill out a questionnaire and this technology will automate it for you. A lot of them are like, but I like drafting the documents. I like thinking about it. I like crafting it. I like putting my own mark on it. So I think sometimes when people ask about technological innovations, would you like to see? Personally, I'd like someone just to automate my billing, but not everyone wants that. And I think there needs to be a critical mass of need versus utility that a piece of technology offers.
You'd be surprised. We had other guests that want a closet that you put in your clothes and they are ironed for the next day. So
I don't mind ironing. You see, it's about those things that like I don't actually mind ironing. So it's funny. I think everyone wants to solve the problem they dislike doing.
For sure. You mentioned also what often junior lawyers do in the beginning of their career. And there I started thinking that we are at the time that this profession, with the help of technology, is undergoing a lot of transformation. And you have seen part of it, or you are also like right now part of it. I was wondering, for somebody who is considering studying law, what kind of advice or insights you would share with them?
Yeah, I actually gave a talk to some of the prospective trainees that we have in here. And I do, it's purposely somewhat thought-provoking and it's almost a little bit adversarial, where I basically pull up some sort of scary statistics around the application of technology and challenge some of our junior lawyers as to what their careers are going to look like. And one of the things I always touch on is, so if you strip back all of the hype around AI and just go to the pure mechanics of computing, every 2 years that like the processing power in a computer doubles and its price halves effectively. So part of the reason that AI is having this moment is we're reaching an inflection point where it's more and more cost effective to run these types of systems on smaller and smaller tasks. Like you could have run ChatGPT if you had the technology 20 years ago, but it would have cost so much money to do it. Only the two largest organizations in the world could. But with cloud technology and computing technology and AI chips, and one of the things I always say to like junior lawyers is by the time they retire, you're going to be able to buy a phone with more processing power than the entire human race. So you'll be able to buy a laptop with more processing power than every human being on Earth. So the kinds of problems that laptop's going to be able to fix quickly when it becomes mechanized and more innovated. So for them, when they plot out their careers, lots of the things that they're going to need to focus on are maybe the softer skills. They're going to have to be better with people, better at relationships, better with resilience, better at sort of consistency. Like the technical ability in the law was taken as given. But I actually think technology is going to help level the playing field a lot there, so that the difference between the technically excellent and the technically competent and the technically not as competent but still good enough a lawyer is going to become smaller and smaller, because technology is going to actually close that gap. So a lot of the softer skills, I think, the people skills, the human skills, the ability to relate and interact and work in a team and work with clients and empathize with people will become more and more important.
That's really interesting. And would you be able to share with us a high and a low point that you have had throughout your career?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about the high points. I'm not that I'm struggling to think of them, but I try to think of, I'm a bit self-critical and contrarian when I take views. I tend not to celebrate my wins that much at work because they're not really my wins. They're my clients' wins generally. And it's my job to deliver them. So I tend not to take a huge amount of, but I think one of the high points I had, just because it was a real markation of the end of a lot of hard work, was qualifying as a lawyer, because you spend sort of 7.5 years in Ireland, multiple degrees and hundreds of exams to get there. And as much for my parents as it was for me, it was just a really nice day. You have a lovely graduation ceremony, and it was a real like accomplishment. It bookended a chapter in my life and started the next one. So I always think of that as a very nice high point in my career. In terms of the low points, I think one of the biggest low points in my career was generally when I started. So I qualified in 2010, and it was just a very difficult time to be a lawyer. It was a very difficult time to be an anything, to be honest, in Ireland, because we were in the depths of a deep recession. There was like 20% unemployment in the legal profession. There was a lot of unemployment generally. There was a lot of austerity. An awful lot of my friends were getting on planes and emigrating because there was no work for them in Ireland. And it was just hard. Like it was like you could see the stresses and strains of running a law firm written on your boss's face every day. And they weren't necessarily the most enjoyable workplaces to be in. And that's not strictly limited to law firms. I think it was a lot of businesses at that time. And that was, I would say, it was very formative of me. I learned a lot working in those type of environments, but it was definitely a bit of a low point when you can look back and go, God, like that was tough. And there wasn't as much crack on the floor. People weren't as, you didn't hear laughter as often in the office because people were stressed. People were worried about where the next case was coming from. People were much more worried about not being busy enough and what that might have meant, because there were lawyers queuing up outside the building looking for your job and that sort of thing. So I certainly would reflect on that time as a bit of a low generally.
This conversation has been very thought-provoking for me myself. I unfortunately we're reaching the end of the conversation, but what we always ask our guests is whether they could share a song that they love listening, and not their favorite, maybe it's so hard always to choose, and what it represents to them, whatever it is.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. What I came up with off the top of my head was "Don't Stop Believing" by Journey, and partly because they had a bit of a revival when I was in university for a 1980s band. I think it was largely due to two TV shows, Scrubs being one, where JD and Turk's favorite band was Journey, and then the closing scene in The Sopranos being the other, where it faded to black and played it, and they became hot again. But I always think "Don't Stop Believing" reminds me of a time in my life where I was footloose and fancy free, and it's very much a college song for me. The other ones I was thinking of, which were basically anything by Avicii, because I'm a big fan of electronic dance music. And I think part of the reason I like electronic dance music is it's just happy. It's joyful. There's no such thing as a sad electronic dance music song. So I often use it as a mood regulator, where if I'm having a bad or hard day and I'm leaving the office, I might throw on some Avicii for the walk home, and I generally am in a good mood by the time I get home.
Then that's how we're going to close today the conversation. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me.